Well, welcome, sales associates, budding sales professionals, those of you looking to break in and get presence in your immediate marketplace and look to eventually take a 30% market share. Just a quick reminder as we start to talk about everything that relates to, I mean, in this instance, we're talking about creating a foothold. That is, of course, breaking into a market or reinvigorating a market, taking better control. Everything is derived around a strategy. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more today. In the past weeks, I talked about, just last week, about the orientation. And, we've got some variations here going on at the moment, particularly as it relates to those of us that are still in the constraints of lockdown. I know that parts of NZ, you're at different levels and you might be suffering the frustrations. Those of you down in Melbourne, you've gotten some relief, but there's still that added push where you sort of feel the restriction of trying to get those connections, getting those clients on board, moving them into the listing space. Where are we now? Well, you can see with the growth that I have here, and the hair's just getting longer all the time. I think we're up to about, or just over 90 days of lockdown, but we have been navigating our way around it. And those, of course, that are north of the border here in New South Wales, up in Queensland, and you guys have had it pretty good. And of course, over there in Perth, even better, probably not suffering too much. And of course, some of our guys that are in this program down in South Australia, in the Adelaide area, similar thing. I still say that you have to be ready for anything that might come at you in regards to lockdowns and how it works. But, it doesn't matter where you're looking at the moment. A lot of property sellers are suffering the very same frustrations that you might have, but from a different perspective. So last week we talked about orientation and how your prospecting mode needs to be geared toward how the client might be perceiving what's going on out there. And a lot of us are suffering the frustration right now of trying to get sellers on the market. And I made the very specific point of saying that to get them on board, you've got to move away from trying to, in the first instance, utilize this word appraisal, stay away from just the pure price orientation, and understand that people move for reasons. They don't move for money. I'm not saying that money doesn't play a role. I'm not saying that a lot of sellers aren't conscious of that, but I am saying that it's not the singular motive for them. And today I'm going to talk, as we move through this, more about making the connection. And in making the connection with someone, you have to, I give over to empathy, not sympathy. Sympathy's a bit of a worry, especially as you get into the realms of sales professionalism and you're looking to list properties and then move people across into selling and managing their expectation. Being sympathetic is one space you don't want to go into. And the reason I explain that is if you move into a sympathetic disposition, then you too are emotional. And the moment you become emotional, all sense of logic leaves you. So you have to stand back from it. Whereas being in an empathetic disposition is putting yourself in the other person's shoes. One of the great things I teach or try to get people to understand, especially as this has a relationship in and around prospecting, is to see yourself as your prospective clients might be perceiving you. So if you look at it from where they sit, especially if we just look at real estate agents as a whole, because there is a necessary, or there is seemingly a shortage of properties coming onto the market at present, and believe you me, markets change and they will change, especially as we see the fallout of COVID. And, there's going to be a shake-up with people losing their jobs or clawing their way back. There are many people that have been financially disadvantaged. despite the fact that people are paying in some areas well and truly over what I perceive to be market value. They've done this just through frustration. This could augur in negatively as we move forward. So you have to start to develop a healthy and empathetic disposition and understanding on how they're working. Don't lose sight, irrespective of what's going on, of your strategy. As I keep saying to people in and around everything that's happening with COVID, those that are suffering, you know, the angst and the issues around lockdown, I'm making it very clear to them that the other thing that we have to be very mindful of at this point in time is that the future will arrive. This will clear. And I believe it's the property sellers, those property sellers, that when the blockages lift, they're going to look toward the agents that have created a relationship with them. Now, last week we talked about creating that, you know, your orientation needs to be centered, I believe, around a more sound comprehension of the motive of each of the active property sellers that you're talking to. And of course, if you actually comprehend that motive, then you'll see not just their reluctance, but you'll also see the opportunity to provide good information, good service, good understanding, and above everything else, the necessary care to move forward in working with them. Now, many of you are actually working hand in hand with a peak performance professional. So this week, I'll just make you aware of what we talked about with our real estate rock stars, those that you know, actually have sales associates that are working in tandem with them. So you might be prospecting in order to secure listing presentations to get across to a sales professional. I want you to hang on to the idea of not panicking that you're not just getting people that are cooperating and coming through, and just focus on this service orientation and pandering and moving into an education space. So those of you that are working through, I know that Nick Saparovich, he's got Hannah and Liz, who you guys are listening today, and you just need to focus on making sure you've identified all of those active property sellers. So it's important that you've built those lists, you know who these people are, and then just a moment I'm going to talk about moving forward with greater identification, greater connection with the motive, and then in seeing yourself as others see you, the type of communication you want to be bombarding these people with. So as the dust settles, as the lockdown restrictions are lifted, those sellers will just come across to those agencies that have been behaving, in my opinion, quite professionally. What the no-no here right now is to be pushing just to get the property on the market, just to get it sold, and especially just because there's an opportunity to secure a great price. Remembering the price only has relevance insofar as the motive, and what you want to drill down and where you want to spark conversation is in and around the motive. So the future arrives, be aware of that. Make sure that you're doing all the right things now, that so when the future arrives, when those restrictions lift, bang, you're moving in. Again, as it relates to the presentation, you are far better off if you are receiving an invitation to come down and run a listing presentation rather than you pushing by solicitation. Invariably, if you are pushing by solicitation, if you are desperately trying to get them on board, you are most likely running the risk of badgering them to the point where they will kick back. This is the worst case scenario that you can have, because if you get that talk where they say, look, don't call us, we'll call you, or worse, they start saying, look, we think we've changed our mind, we're just going to stay put. When that's not the case, the only reason that they're saying that is they're just trying to figure out a way to get you to leave them alone. And this is an awkward situation. It's awkward in the sense that you kind of worry that, now that I've been told not to call them, if I don't call them, I'm running the risk of them maybe connecting with a competitor, and all of a sudden I'll see that that property's listed with another agent. Or if I do talk to them, I'm running a bigger risk where they say, just go away because I've been told to leave them be and I'm not doing it. So you've got to tamper the amount. Yes, you've got to use a little bit of smarts to figure out how often you should call them. I think, once a week is more than enough. I think with some people, you might be able to relax that to once every 10, maybe even 15 days, so long as you're making good contact, or as long as they feel like you are there, not necessarily talking directly with them, but you are giving them bits and pieces that have the same net effect of them knowing that you're there, represents good professional contact, but it's not of the nature where you're on the phone and badgering them. And I'll show you how to do this in just a moment. Remembering that our strategy is quite simple. We want invitation, not solicitation. And when we get down there, whether it be us working with, a peak performance professional, or you're servicing a listing professional, or you are a listing professional, it's at that space you want to move into a listing education. When you get down to do that presentation, and last week we focused on the Property Sellers Research Guide. That is the platform by which you are sending them out. This completely supersedes any of you that have in the past talked about a pre-listing kit or otherwise. This is a document that empowers property sellers to which they're doing anyway, by the way, to research the market ahead of putting their property on. That we're showing them how to figure out the comparative price without our intervention. I don't really want to get involved in a debate around pricing, but I do want to show a seller how to understand that benchmark and how they can reasonably assess where their property might sit comparatively. But irrespective of that, we do understand that comparative value is just a subjective opinion, and it's not a price that you can, I guess, hang your hat on. And we make this very clear to active property sellers, saying to them that your opinion is going to differ from ours, which largely then is going to differ from that of each buyer. And of course, involved in this are what we call the value variables. Value variables, many of these are beyond the scope of our control. We can't control supply and demand, and this can positively or negatively affect price, which is quite evident at the moment, because in most markets there is a reluctance, because of the lockdowns and those sorts of things, for people to put their properties on. So demand is exceeding supply. This is not something we can control with any discernible weight. We can't control fiscal policy, and be aware of the fact that this will change as the brunt of the economic effect of COVID starts to hit certain economies. Then lending institutions will change their lending criteria. So, the amount of equity someone has to have before borrowing, this would increase, and that's going to positively or negatively affect pricing. And of course, people's propensity to be able to borrow at all is going to be affected one way or the other. So these are things that we need to make consistent with how we run the listing presentation. And what we're doing at the moment, as it relates to Sales Trainer Mentor, is focusing very heavily on improving the listing presentation so that everything that we send out with that Property Sellers Research Guide is consistent with what we're presenting when we get to that listing in presentation. And that presentation, we talked about this being platforming, that it is a listing education rather than a presentation, because a presentation suggests the notion of talking at someone rather than talking or engaging with someone and teaching them the right way to go about it. So we're showing them that market value is something that can be positively influenced by a consummate professional, particularly as it relates to marketing, negotiation, and indeed communication. You know, marketing being your ability to create a perception around the property so that it is better than it actually looks. Marketing also being the very tool that you use in prospecting, in creating presence inside a marketplace so that you fall onto the shopping list of any prospective seller. So it's these three phases. Keep with this strategy. The first of this is what we talk about here is foothold activity. And this is all about creating presence in the marketplace. What I'm going to talk about today is about retaining that once you've identified these active property sellers, building a relationship or creating a conduit of information and representing your product to the point that they feel comfortable that you've been professional in your capacity and they do invite you down to run the listing presentation. Traction, this is the phase when you actually are winning listings, is about actions that create regeneration, turning one listing into two, two into four, and so on. And then momentum tasks at the real estate rock star level is about tasks that you put in place. And all of this week, we've been very heavily focused on getting those real estate rock stars, the peak performance professionals, to focus on building their accolades and their case studies, which I'll be talking about in just a moment, and pushing those out so that people can see evidence of people making connections with you and relying on those products and relying on that advice. This is great fodder to be getting out to property sellers. So all of that, that's all been very much, you know, with the PSRG, we said that it's got to be consistent with everything you're delivering, especially as it relates to comparative value versus market value. I absolutely implore you, and I made mention of this last week, and I'll say the same thing again, just jump onto Sales Trainer Active or onto listandsell.com.au. On the drop-down box on Sales Trainer, you will see provision there for a thing that says freebies. Click onto that and you'll see a recording. It goes for about 3 minutes where we explain the difference between comparative value and market value. You will never do yourself any harm by listening to this over and over for about 21 days straight. Once you have the power to understand this, what I explain inside that 3 minutes, I've made millions of dollars out of as a real estate sales professional, and you can too. If you can explain, or sorry, in the first instance, if you understand the difference between comparative value and market value, and then you in turn are able to confidently explain this to any active property seller, it will position you ahead of the competition almost indelibly. Yeah, well and truly, leaps and bounds ahead of any other real estate agent out there. Most real estate agents only understand marketing in one dimension, but indeed property pricing, they only understand it in the sense that, you know, you sell a property. That's very limited. Property sellers are more interested in what they want to do the other side of the sale, and great real estate agents understand this and put all of their energy into that area. So I just want to talk about making the connection. And what we said is that when you're actually running these prospecting protocols, your first job is just basically sticking to the identification of sellers. And in that identification, all I'm really doing is trying to figure out whether or not they are looking to sell a property. Now, this could be not until they find something. So a lot of them are saying this. I don't necessarily think that's the right way to go about it, but let them have their head. Don't do the push. And in the first instance, all you're looking to do is qualify whether or not they do have a property to sell. The moment you do see that they do have one to sell, immediately move to the motive. So I did simply say, tell me, where are you coming from? So if they say, for argument's sake, that wherever they're coming from is in direct correlation to perhaps if it was an open for inspection that they came to in the same suburb as where that open for inspection was, I would then just openly say, so were you attending this open for inspection purely to compare this property to the one that you currently have? Or are you looking to move within the same suburb? So the moment they give me an answer to that, so once I know where they're coming from, my next question is, and where are you looking at moving to? Now, if they say to me, well, we're not looking at moving at all, this is an investment property, I'd say, so once you actually then are able to sell this investment property or looking to, what were you intending to do with that? For what reason were you looking to sell it? Because it could be because they're looking to make a bigger move, or they might be looking at hanging it on. But you just need to understand the motive more clearly. Once I'm hitting on the motive, and it's very simple, where are you coming from? Where are you going to? And then my conversation is very much centric to where they're going to. And all I'm looking to do is establish an understanding around this, and for them to see that I have acknowledged it. And because my conversation is centric to this, they understand that I care about what they're doing. And if you are writing some notes down here right now, let me just explain one very important factor to you. The word care is entirely synonymous with the word professionalism. All you have to do to be a consummate professional is demonstrate care. And this is where the connection is, where we start to make that connection. Now, in questioning, we want to dig down as deeply as we can around the motive, because please understand this, the more that they are prepared to reveal to you what their motive is about, and more succinct they are about how they feel about that motive in the emotional sense, the greater the connection they've made. And the more they make that connection, the more likely you are to get the invitation in. So the thing that I want to explain to you is that a motive works in layers. Now, most real estate sales professionals do focus on the veneer, on the top layer. We basically say to people, what are you trying to do, or where are you trying to go? So what are you trying to achieve on the back end of having sold this property? But typically, all that is revealed from that is what I refer to as the superficial motive. People aren't going to say, for example, and here's you know, I give you broadly speaking the major categories of motive. People might want to buy a bigger property. People might want to move to another suburb because of a job transfer, or maybe a school catchment area or something of the like. People might want to sell because they're having financial difficulty all the way through to they're in dire straits financially, and they have to trade back because, well, they don't have money. There might be a deceased estate, a death in the family, or some change in the family environment, or the family might be growing. It could just be because they've had a financial windfall, because they've come into a great deal of money and they just want to buy a bigger property. So you see, there's all those little categories, or they're getting married, or they're empty nesters and the kids have left home and they're trading back. But understand this, there are as many good reasons for selling as there are less than palatable reasons for selling. So you can't really go at this with this, you know, completely happy and optimistic viewpoint. You actually have to demonstrate a degree of care until you understand where that motive sits, and recognize when you say to somebody, where are you off to, or what are you trying to do? Nobody's going to say where you're off to if they're in financial difficulty. They're not going to say bankruptcy court. Where are you off to? Bankruptcy court. Can't wait to get there. So initially they're going to say something rather superficial, like, we're just looking at trading back to get our finances under control. That's what they might say. So we've got to dig through layers as they come more to trust where we're at And as they trust more where we're at, they will divulge, they will let us penetrate through these layers. So, and remembering this is not an interrogation. We are not looking to interrogate that active property seller. It's like, what are you trying to do with the flashlight in the eyes? It's more about a discovery process. So this will come in time. Now, if you look at this on face value, given that there are a lot of people that are reluctant, they are flagging that they are going to do something, but are relatively reluctant at this point in time, it offers great opportunity for you to move down through those layers. And given that you are competing against other agents to win the favor of these people, so long as you're not pushing too hard, providing good service, good communicative skills, and a good sound understanding of how to get deeper and understand that motive by giving advice rather than focusing on price, when the future does arrive, you will be the go-to person that will win that opportunity, that will win that business. So how do we go through those layers? Well, the first thing is, what aware you're trying to go or do. This, how we then dang through those layers, just very carefully, not necessarily asking the direct question, but we start to say, why would you want to do that? Why is it that you are looking to trade back, or why are you looking at that particular area? And over time, they will start to let you know where that works. And even to the point, as I become more familiar, for example, if somebody said to me that we want to get a bigger place because our children are getting older and each of them need their own room. At the moment, we've got them sleeping two to a room, and they need their own space because they need a place to study and all that sort of stuff. And I might just say over time, why would you want to do that? Surely they can, get around it, or blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden they might say, well, when I was a kid, we were two to a room, and I swore to myself, if ever I was able to do it, my kids will all have their own room in their own space. And then you just keep pushing down. All of a sudden they'll say, look, it's just the way it has to be. That's what I want for my children. But now I know that I've arrived. And then I can move to the third point, which is, when does this have to be done by? When do you see yourself getting this done? Now, if they're talking about their kids growing up, they might then reveal to you, well, the kids are moving into high school next year. It has to be done by the end of this year or by December. All of this is good information for you to understand the emotive. It's understanding that when you get to the bottom, when you've done through those layers and you get an answer to when this has to be done, the deadline, you then can understand what I refer to as the emotive. And then you can comfortably say, I'm in a position where I have control of this and I'm the favorable choice moving forward. Now, remembering, and here's the most important part in your conversations, when you are talking to these sellers, make sure that the subject matter only relates to 3 specific subjects, and constantly drive the conversations to and around those specific subjects. The first is that I focus on, as I've already showed you, the motive. I keep all of the conversation centric to the motive. Secondly, I'm more than happy to drive the subject matter in and around the property. Then I'm very happy to be discussing the property and where that sits inside the equation. So, and the third subject matter is the client themselves. I will openly discuss or talk to them about themselves. So if it's topics of interest, or if they're moving because of a school, I might talk about the school or whatever. What you don't do, what you want to avoid completely, and a lot of salespeople make this mistake, and I'm happy to be teaching you this well ahead of you ever getting into the space of moving into sales professionalism and the list and sell stuff. This is what I openly explain to them all the way, is refrain from talking about yourself. People wrongly assume that if they're talking to someone about commonality, about something that they have in common with people, this builds rapport. It's not true. The quickest way to build rapport with someone is get them talking about themselves. So keep driving your questions back toward the motive the property, the client. Now, this is not to say that you ignore anything that's said to you, but just keep driving it back toward that point. Now you're going to see this next point, which I hope makes a lot of sense to you. So what we're looking to do as we're discovering the motive with these clients, we now need to back it up, and we need to have lots of passive contact with them, which is not replacing the direct contact, the telephone calls and the follow-up, but it does allow you to tamper the amount to a point that you feel comfortable with, and it's got to be of your own design. So if you think, I really only ought to be calling these people every week and a half, 10 days, 15 days, maybe even every fortnight. But you still need to be sending information so that your presence is still fit and the connection is still there, and they're comfortable that you are the go-to person to ask questions. And of course, if this information that you're providing invokes good engagement and good conversation, this is going to allow you to build that relationship so that as the lockdowns clear, they're going to connect with you straight away. You're also going to have loads of opportunities, and I know that this is one that I spoke with Sean Donovan, who happens to be on here again today. But you know, he noticed that when he was making this connection and backing off with the direct contact, that one specific seller just came to him, and again by invitation, hey, have a look at this property. As good luck with have it, we're looking at selling. And that's because the demonstration of professionalism was there, the demonstration of care was there, and the connection was made, so the confidence was there and the conversations were in place, so the invitation came exclusive of the solicitation. So here are the things that you need to send. I hope you've got your pens up. I've already talked about this last week, a property seller's research guide. If you don't have a property seller's research guide and you want to know more about it, get in touch and we can set you up and get you on your way with that. Or at the very least, your company might have what they call a pre-listing kit. I believe even though you don't have the listing presentation, that ought to be sent out, because at least you're demonstrating or getting a viewing or a visual of the product that your company is offering out to them. Second thing is you immediately put them onto your SMS, your text message service, where you are texting out your sales results twice a week. So I say no more than 72 hours. So on 2 occasions each week, if you're just sending out the fact that your company has sold a property or got some people moved, I would make those texts centric to having satisfied motives or people being happy with the timing and then being able to get on with their plans, less so around record prices or figures being up through the roof. I don't see any real joy there. You know, I don't see any real joy in someone, especially, you know, for a buyer to see that they've paid a record price. I'm just not sure that that makes them feel good. I'm not sure. And you've got to remember that every buyer is a future seller. So why have someone feeling like they paid too much for a property or they paid a record price, given that you want to keep them in mind? It doesn't matter. We're in the business of solving problems for people and just focusing on getting them moved. So you need to get those SMS texts out. The next one, and this is a beauty, those of you that are in the PC3M program, or you're actually working with one of our real estate rock stars or our peak performers, or you're in sales trainer mentor, I openly say that once you've made the connection and you know that you've identified the motive and you know that these people are moving, I would send them out a comparative market analysis. Now, if you are going to send them out a comparative market analysis, the only thing that I don't want you to put on there, that I would recommend, sorry, that you don't put on there, is your opinion as to where it sits price-wise. Stay away from it, but still empower them to look at that information and arrive at their own comparative value. And I've got a cover letter for those of you that are in these programs to send with that, which is consistent with your property seller's research guide, and making them aware that it's just a subjective opinion, but this will create a great premise for discussions when you're talking to them, and they can talk about properties that have been sold in and around, and it just stimulates conversation, therein providing the opportunity for you to offer advice. Now, if you're a sales associate and you're supporting, as I said, a peak performance professional, and because you've sent this out, they start to talk to you about price. Well, I would then say this is the opportunity to get the connection with the professional. I would say, look, you know, if I was Hannah, for argument's sake, and they said, yeah, we noticed that you sold this property, blah, blah, blah. I'd say, look, it sounds to me, it's not what I do at the moment. My job is to support and service Nick, who's my sales professional. It sounds to me like I need to get him to give you a call. That's where you get them in, and that's where the sales professional starts to talk to them, and you can create that introduction. But do get out the comparative market analysis, because I believe even though we're a ways off getting to the presentation, this creates the premise for discussion. You then want to send your newsletter out, make sure that they're getting what we refer to as the market roundup. Importantly, you really want to get your recommendations out there. And I spent a lot of time on Real Estate Rockstar this week on Rock and Roller, explaining that you don't want to be sending out any of these rating platforms like Rate My Agent or otherwise. Don't be, and believe me, I do support them. But the problem with those platforms and the ones that you see on realestate.com, and I don't know whether Trade Me have a similar sort of thing over there in New Zealand, but if you're sending those out, the problem with those is as they come in, they see the other agencies. And I know that, you know, realestate.com, I mean, I went past a bus shelter the other day and they have the agents that spend the most amount of money with them on the recommendation or on the posters on the bus shelters. So there's no need to utilize those and promote those, because you're just promoting your competitor. And I openly say, stay away from that. But if you use our platform, you are promoting your accolades, your recommendations, your testimonials, independent of advertising any link to any other agency. And this can't do any harm. You also need to show some examples of your marketing. And one of the ones that we suggest is utilizing the TwoView platform, because this is something that you can offer them FOC free of charge. So again, if you're one of our clients to the Property Marketer Suite, I would be pushing that out there because they get that. It's not going to cost them any more, and it's something that they can't get with a competitor. It's a fantastic tool, particularly for those agencies that are in lockdown, because if you can show that you can promote a property utilizing this, you can still be creating connections with buyers, even though the lockdown restrictions are preventing you from advertising on any other platform. We've got lots of agents that are using this very successfully, not least of which down in Victoria, in Melbourne, where their restrictions are rather draconian. I've had Ange Sorrellis and Stu. They've been utilizing the TwoView platform as an alternative whilst they've had the draconian measures around the restrictions that they've had to market properties. And the next one is building case studies. I think this is absolutely imperative at the moment, even though if you've got those restrictions, you need to show examples where people have trusted your judgment to get the property on the market. They've been able to successfully get their property sold, fulfill their motive quite comfortably. And this has all been because they've trusted your judgment, and evidence that you didn't put them in the lurch. They weren't in a situation where they've had to sell and not had somewhere else to go. This again is great evidence. And last, but by no means least, ensure that you are showing evidence of buyers that you already have. And the moment that they are ready to bring the property to market, that you've got buyers that you can bring through the property. One of the great concessions that we make at the sales professional level is that finding a buyer is the easy part, that we already have buyers, and you don't necessarily have to invest marketing dollars to advertise the property. We do talk to them about marketing and the virtues that sit around that. But remembering at this stage, all we're trying to do with active property sellers is give them the confidence to invite you and your company to come down to run a listing presentation, rather than us trying to solicit that presentation. And the whole premise of that to degenerate into us talking about maybe doing an appraisal, giving an idea on price. And then this obviously leads, once we get into desperate stakes, that we start talking about coming down there and listing the property and even perhaps discounting the fee to get to win their favor, or giving away marketing concessions. This is not the way to go. So you just want to demonstrate great service, make that connection, do it on a professional platform, and you will be getting invitations to presentations rather than you having to solicit them, and that future will arrive. I hope you've enjoyed it today. I hope it makes a lot of sense. If you do need more support or help around it, please feel free to get in contact with me, Mark with a K at propertycareers.com.au, or just go ahead and telephone me direct. In fact, that's probably the best way at the moment. +61 410 592 165. I hope you've enjoyed today's little pep talk, and get out there and start making connections with active property sellers.